For the first time in my life, I felt like I was no longer part of my own family. I was standing in a room full of people, surrounded by laughter and music, but I might as well have been a ghost. You know that feeling, don't you? That sinking feeling in your gut when you realize you aren't just unappreciated, you're unwanted. It didn't start that way, of course. It started with a brisket and a drive to Westfield. Stay with me, and I'll tell you exactly how it happened. It was New Year's Eve, and the air was biting cold. I had the heat blasted up in my sedan as I drove down East Broad Street. If you know Westfield, New Jersey, you know it's beautiful. The lawns are manicured, the driveways are long, and the houses look like they were pulled straight out of a catalog. It's a wealthy town, a place for successful people. I felt a swell of pride as I turned onto my son Mike's street. I looked at the large colonial house at the end of the cul-de-sac. It was impressive. I remember when Mike was just a boy, struggling with math homework at our scratched-up kitchen table. I remember the double shifts I worked at the hospital after his father passed, just to make sure he never had to take out a student loan. I remember the down payment check I signed to help him secure this very house because his credit score wasn't quite there yet. I looked at that house and thought, I did good. I helped him build a life. On the passenger seat, next to me, sat my famous brisket. It was heavy, wrapped in 3 layers of foil, and sitting in my best ceramic dish. This wasn't just a piece of meat. This was 30 years of tradition. Every New Year's Eve, since Mike was a little boy, I made this brisket. It was slow-cooked for 12 hours. The smell of onions, garlic, and savory beef filled my car, a smell that usually meant family, warmth, and celebration. I had spent 2 days prepping it, making sure it was perfect for Mike, his wife Karen, and the grandkids. I parked the car, checked my lipstick in the rearview mirror, and took a deep breath. I wanted tonight to be perfect. I grabbed the heavy dish, feeling the warmth radiating through the foil against my chest, and walked up the front path. The house was already bustling. I could hear the bass of the music thumping through the heavy oak door. I rang the bell, and after a long moment, the door swung open. It wasn't Mike. It was Karen, my daughter-in-law. She looked stunning. I have to give her that. She was wearing a silver sequin dress that probably cost more than my first car, and her hair was done up in a perfect twist. But her smile didn't reach her eyes. It never really did with me. "Oh, Danielle, you're here," she said. She didn't step aside to let me in immediately. She just stood there in the doorway, blocking the heat. "Happy New Year, Karen," I said, smiling as best I could while balancing the heavy dish. "I brought the brisket. It's piping hot." Karen looked at the foil-wrapped dish in my hands like I was holding a bag of trash. Her nose wrinkled slightly. "Oh," she said, her voice flat. "Right, the brisket." She stepped back, finally letting me into the foyer. The house was warm and smelled of expensive perfume and something floral, lilies, maybe. "Here, let me take that to the kitchen," I said, starting to unbutton my coat. "I can slice it up for dinner." Karen put a hand up, stopping me. "Actually, Danielle, don't worry about it. We catered this year. We hired that new Italian place downtown. The food is already set out." I froze. "Catered? But Mike always asks for the brisket. It's tradition." "Yeah, well, we wanted something a little more elevated for the party," Karen said, smoothing down her dress. "We don't really have counter space for that big heavy dish. The catering trays are taking up the whole island." I stood there, holding the dish that had taken me 2 days to prepare. My arms were starting to ache. "So what should I do with this?" Karen waved a hand toward the side door. "Just put it in the garage fridge. There's room in there next to the beer." The garage fridge. She wanted me to put my 30-year tradition, the meal I had poured my love into, out in the freezing garage next to the beer cans. "Okay, I said quietly. I'll just go put it in the garage. I walked through the laundry room and into the cold garage. My breath fogged in the air. I found a spot on the wire rack of the spare fridge, shoved between a case of light beer and some leftover soda bottles. I left the brisket there, in the dark and the cold. It felt wrong. It felt disrespectful. But I told myself to shake it off. Don't be sensitive, Danielle, I thought. It's a party. Don't make a scene. I went back inside and hung up my coat. The living room was packed. There were at least 25 people there. I recognized Karen's parents, her sisters, her cousins, and a few of Mike's colleagues. It was loud. People were holding crystal wine glasses and laughing. I scanned the room for Mike. I saw him near the fireplace, holding a scotch, laughing at something his father-in-law was saying. He looked handsome in his suit. I felt that swell of pride again, but it was dampened now. I walked over, hoping for a hug. "Hi, Mike," I said, stepping into the circle. He glanced at me, his smile not faltering, but not exactly warming up either. "Hey, Mom, you made it." "I did," I said. "Happy New Year, honey." "Yeah, Happy New Year," he said, turning back to his father-in-law immediately. So, like I was saying, the market volatility is actually an opportunity if you know where to look. He didn't hug me. He didn't ask how I was. He didn't ask about the brisket. He just turned his back. I stood there for a moment, listening to them talk about stocks and vacations, realizing I had nothing to add to this conversation. Or rather, they didn't think I had anything to add. I wandered away, heading toward the kitchen to get myself a glass of water. The kitchen was magnificent. I ran my hand over the cool, white marble countertops. I looked up at the custom cabinetry and the high, coffered ceilings. It was a chef's kitchen. I remembered the day Mike called me, stressed out because the contractor had gone over budget on the renovation. I remembered writing a check for $40,000 to cover the difference, so they could have this exact marble. I never asked for the money back. I just wanted them to be happy. Now, standing in the kitchen I helped pay for, I couldn't even find a clean glass. The island was covered in silver catering trays, salmon, pasta, roasted vegetables. It looked delicious, but it looked like a corporate event, not a family dinner. I found a paper cup near the sink and filled it with tap water. "All right, everyone, dinner is served." Karen's voice rang out over the music. The crowd migrated toward the dining room. Mike and Karen had set up a massive long table. It was beautifully set with gold chargers, linen napkins, and fresh flowers. It looked like something out of a movie. I waited for the crowd to thin out a bit. I saw Mike sit at the head of the table. Karen sat to his right. Her parents sat to his left. Her sisters and their husbands filled in the seats next to them. The laughter was loud and boisterous. I walked up to the table, looking for a spot near the family. I saw an empty chair a few seats down from Mike. I started to pull it out. "Oh, wait, Danielle." Karen's voice cut through the chatter. I stopped, my hand on the chair back. Everyone looked at me. Karen smiled, a tight, polite smile that didn't hide the annoyance in her eyes. "That seat is for my sister. We actually have a spot for you down at the end." She pointed to the far, far end of the table. "We put the seniors down there," Karen said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "So you have more room and it's a little quieter. You know how you get overwhelmed." I looked where she was pointing. It wasn't just the end of the table. It was an added card table pushed against the main table to extend it. It was right next to the sliding glass door, which I could see wasn't fully sealed against the winter wind. "Oh," I said. My voice felt small. "Okay." I walked past the entire family. I walked past Mike, who didn't look up from his plate. I walked past Karen's parents, who were already buttering their rolls. I walked all the way to the drafty card table at the end. There was only one other person sitting there. It was a distant cousin of Karen's named Earl. I think he was someone's uncle from out of state. He was wearing headphones and looking at his phone. He didn't even look up when I sat down. I sat in the folding chair. A cold draft hit my shoulder immediately. I looked down the long expanse of the table. It felt like a mile away. Up at the head of the table, Mike was pouring wine for Karen's dad. Karen was laughing, throwing her head back, her diamonds catching the light of the chandelier. They were passing platters of food around, sharing stories, clinking glasses. Nobody passed the food to my end. The catering trays stopped about 4 seats up. I sat there with my empty plate. I looked at my son. He was the man I had raised, the boy I had protected, the man whose lifestyle was built on the foundation of my sacrifices and my savings. And he couldn't even be bothered to make sure I had a warm seat or a plate of food. I folded my hands in my lap to stop them from shaking. I forced a smile onto my face because that's what mothers do. We smile. We endure. We don't make scenes. But as I sat there in the cold, watching my family celebrate without me, something inside me shifted. It wasn't sadness anymore. It was clarity. For the first time, I didn't see my son. I saw a stranger, and I realized that to them, I wasn't a mother or a grandmother. I was just an invisible guest. I sat at the card table, my hands folded in my lap, listening to the sound of silverware scraping against china. The draft from the sliding glass door was persistent, a cold slice of air that hit my ankles every few seconds. I pulled my cardigan tighter around myself. It was a stark contrast to the warmth radiating from the other end of the table, where the real party was happening. From my vantage point, I watched the food being passed around. The catering staff had laid out beautiful platters of filet mignon, roasted asparagus with hollandaise sauce, and truffle mashed potatoes. The platters moved efficiently from hand to hand, from Karen to Mike, to Karen's parents, to her sisters. But like a tide that loses its momentum before reaching the shore, the heavy platters seemed to stop just before they reached me. By the time the mashed potatoes made it to my end, the bowl was scraped clean, leaving only a smear of butter on the side. The filet mignon platter had 2 small, dry ends left. Earl, the cousin with the headphones, didn't seem to notice. He had already piled his plate high earlier when I wasn't looking. I took the small piece of meat and a few stalks of asparagus. I didn't want to ask for more. I didn't want to be the burden Karen had already implied I was. The conversation at the main table was roaring. They were talking about a ski trip Karen's parents had taken to Aspen. Everyone was laughing about the snow conditions and the après-ski champagne. I sat there, chewing slowly, trying to catch someone's eye. Just one person. If I could just make eye contact, maybe I could smile, and maybe they would smile back, and I wouldn't feel so incredibly small. But no one looked. It was as if a glass wall had been erected between the main table and the seniors section. I saw an opening in the conversation when the topic shifted to childhood sports. Mike was laughing about how uncoordinated he used to be. I remember that. I called out, raising my voice slightly to bridge the distance. Remember when you tried out for Little League, Mike? You wore those oversized cleats I bought from the thrift store because we couldn't find your size. You tripped over first base. I smiled, waiting for the shared laughter. It was a fond memory, a reminder of how far he had come. The table went quiet for a split second. Mike looked up, fork halfway to his mouth. He didn't smile. He looked annoyed, like a CEO interrupted by a janitor during a board meeting. "Mom, nobody wants to hear about the thrift store cleats," he said, his voice dismissive. He didn't even look at me for more than a second before turning back to his father-in-law, Bill. "Anyway, Bill, that's why I joined the country club in Summit. The greens are faster. I'm thinking of getting a new set of irons, maybe those Japanese forged ones you were talking about. 5 grand, but hey, you pay for quality, right? I lowered my fork. The piece of meat in my mouth suddenly tasted like ash. Thrift store cleats. He said it with such disdain. I looked at him, my son wearing a cashmere sweater, sitting in a dining room with a crystal chandelier, and I felt a wave of dizziness. He talked about 5 grand for golf clubs like it was pocket change. My mind flashed back 30 years. I remembered the day after his father died. Mike was 8. I sat at our kitchen table with a stack of bills and a calculator, crying because I was short $75 for the electric bill. I remembered taking double shifts at the hospital, working 16 hours on my feet, coming home with swollen ankles just so I could buy him brand new sneakers for school, so the other kids wouldn't tease him. I looked at the walls of this house, this beautiful colonial house in Westfield. Mike didn't buy this house. Not really. When he and Karen were first married, the bank wouldn't approve them. They didn't have the 20% down payment. I did. I remembered walking into the bank manager's office. I remembered signing the check for $100,000. That was my life savings. That was the money from the sale of the house I had shared with his father. I gave it to them, no strings attached, because I wanted them to have a good start. I wanted them to be safe. Thanks, Mom, he had said back then, hugging me. I'll never forget this. Now, he was talking about Japanese golf clubs while I sat at a card table next to a drafty window, eating cold asparagus. He hadn't just forgotten, he had rewritten the story. In his version, he was the self-made man. I was just an embarrassing footnote from a poorer time. All right, everyone. Mike stood up, tapping a spoon against his wine glass. The sharp ding, ding cut through the chatter. The room hushed. Even Earl took off his headphones. It was time for the New Year's toast. Mike looked flushed and happy. He held up his glass of expensive red wine. He looked like the picture of success. I straightened up in my folding chair. This was usually the moment where family was acknowledged. I didn't expect a parade, but a nod would have been nice. A simple, thanks, Mom, for everything. I just want to say a few words, Mike began, his voice booming with confidence. This has been an incredible year for us. We've hit some major milestones. He turned to Karen, his eyes soft. First, to my beautiful wife, Karen. You are the heart of this family. You made this house a home. You organize our lives, you raise our kids, and you throw the best parties in New Jersey. I'd be lost without you, babe. Ah, the table chorused. Karen beamed, raising her glass. Mike turned to his left, toward Karen's parents. To Bill and Susan. You guys are the life of the party. Thank you for the vacation to the vineyard this summer, and thank you for always bringing the fun. You guys are the best in-laws a guy could ask for. Here, here. Bill shouted, raising his glass high. Mike continued, and to my team at the firm. I know you guys aren't family by blood, but you're family by choice. We crushed the numbers this quarter. Here's to a bigger bonus next year. A few of his colleagues cheered. I sat there, my glass of water in my hand, waiting. My heart was hammering in my chest. I'm next, I told myself. He's just saving me for last. Mike looked around the room, his smile wide. He looked at the kids. He looked at the neighbors. His eyes scanned past the end of the table, past the card table, past me, and landed on the wall behind me. So, he said, lifting his glass higher, to a prosperous new year. Let's eat, drink, and be wealthy. Cheers. Cheers. The room erupted. Glasses clinked. Laughter exploded. I sat frozen. My glass of water hovered halfway to my lips. He hadn't mentioned me. Not a word. Not a nod. I looked at him, laughing as he clinked glasses with Karen's father. It wasn't an accident. You don't accidentally forget the mother who raised you alone. You don't accidentally forget the woman who paid for the roof over your head. It was intentional. I felt a stinging sensation in my eyes, but I refused to let the tears fall. It wasn't sadness anymore. It was something heavier, darker. It was the realization of total erasure. I realized then that I wasn't just unappreciated. I was being actively edited out of their lives. To acknowledge me would be to acknowledge that they needed help. To acknowledge me would be to admit that their perfect, wealthy lifestyle was built on the back of a nurse who worked double shifts and wore thrift store shoes. They didn't want to see the struggle. They only wanted to see the success. And because I represented the struggle, I had to be hidden away at the children's table, silenced, and ignored. I set my water glass down on the wobbly card table. The water rippled, trembling just like my hands. I looked at the happy couple at the head of the table. I am not part of this family, I thought, the realization settling in my gut like a stone. I am just the bank account they drained to get here. I took a deep breath. The noise of the party seemed to fade into a dull roar. I wasn't going to make a scene. Not yet. But the heat rising in my chest told me that I couldn't sit in this folding chair much longer. I had spent a lifetime being their foundation, but they had forgotten that when you remove the foundation, the whole house comes crashing down. I watched Karen whisper something in Mike's ear, and they both laughed, glancing briefly in my direction before looking away. That look, that dismissal was the final straw. I wasn't sad anymore. I was done. The dinner plates were finally being cleared. I watched the catering staff move efficiently around the table, stacking fine china and sweeping away crumbs. The laughter had died down a little, replaced by the heavy, contented sighs of people who have eaten too much rich food. I was exhausted, not the good kind of tired you feel after a day of gardening or playing with grandchildren. I felt drained, like my soul had been siphoned out through a straw. The draft from the sliding door had stiffened my joints, and my empty stomach was starting to cramp. I realized I hadn't actually eaten a full meal, just that one piece of dry beef and some cold asparagus. I looked at my watch. It was only 9 o'clock, but I knew I couldn't stay until midnight. I couldn't sit here for another 3 hours, pretending to be invisible, waiting for a ball to drop, while my son pretended I didn't exist. I decided it was time to slip away. I stood up slowly, my knees popping in the silence of my corner. No one noticed. They were busy passing around bottles of port and cognac. I began the long walk from the card table back toward the kitchen. I needed to get my coat, but first I needed to get my dish. That brisket was still sitting in the garage fridge, untouched. I figured since they hadn't served it, I could take it home. It would be my dinner for the week. It seemed like a simple, logical request. I walked into the kitchen. Karen was there, leaning against the island, holding a glass of wine. She looked tired. The facade of the perfect hostess was starting to crack around the edges. There was a smudge of lipstick on her teeth, and her shoulders were slumped. "Karen," I said softly. She jumped a little, spilling a drop of red wine on the marble counter. She spun around, her eyes narrowing when she saw it was me. "God, Danielle, you startled me," she snapped, grabbing a paper towel and aggressively wiping the counter. "What do you need? We're about to serve coffee." "I'm sorry," I said, keeping my voice level. "I'm actually going to head out. It's getting late for me, and the roads might ice up." "Okay," she said, turning back to the sink. She didn't say stay for coffee. She didn't say thanks for coming. Just okay. I hesitated. I just wanted to ask, could I perhaps take my brisket home? Since you didn't serve it, it's just sitting in the garage, and I'd hate for it to go to waste. It was an innocent question. Or so I thought. Karen froze. She set her wine glass down on the counter with a hard clink. She turned around slowly, and the look on her face wasn't just annoyance anymore. It was pure, unadulterated venom. "Are you serious?" she asked, her voice rising. Excuse me?" "The brisket," she said, louder now. "You're asking for the brisket? We just hosted a 5-course dinner. Danielle, we just spent thousands of dollars on catering, wine, and service. And you're standing here worried about your cheap pot roast." The kitchen was open to the dining room. The chatter at the table stopped. Heads turned. "It's not a pot roast," I stammered, feeling the heat rise in my cheeks. "It's a brisket. I spent 2 days making it. I just didn't want to leave my ceramic dish." "It's always about you, isn't it?" Karen exploded. She wasn't whispering anymore. She was shouting. The stress of the holiday, the wine, and her underlying resentment toward me all came pouring out at once. "You come into my house, you critique the food by bringing your own, and now you want to raid the fridge like a scavenger?" Karen pointed a manicured finger at me. "God, Danielle, you are always taking. You take up space. You take up energy. You're just heavy." The word hung in the air. "Heavy. You're a burden on the mood," she spat. "Every time you walk into a room, the energy just dies. We're trying to have a fun, sophisticated night, and you're here nagging me about leftovers." My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I looked past Karen, into the dining room. Everyone was watching. Karen's mother had her hand over her mouth, but her eyes were gleaming with curiosity. Earl had taken his headphones off. I looked at Mike. He was sitting at the head of the table, his chair swiveled around to face the kitchen. He looked embarrassed. Not for me. He looked embarrassed by me. "Mike," I said. My voice was trembling. I hated that it trembled. I wanted to be strong, but the humiliation was stripping me bare. "Mike, please." I waited for him to stand up. I waited for him to say, "Karen, stop. That's my mother. She just wants her dish." I waited for the boy I raised to show up. Mike sighed. It was a long, loud sigh. He looked at Karen, who was fuming, chest heaving. Then he looked at me. He checked his watch, a reflexive, arrogant gesture that said, "I don't have time for this." "Mom, honestly," he said. He didn't stand up. He stayed seated, swirling the cognac in his glass. "You're killing the vibe," he said. His voice was calm, which somehow made it worse. "Karen has been working her tail off for 3 days to make this perfect. And you're in here picking a fight over meat. It's petty." "I'm not picking a fight," I whispered. If you're going to be needy," Mike interrupted, talking over me like I was a toddler, "then maybe you should just head out early. Like you said. Just go. It's better for everyone." The silence that followed was deafening. It wasn't a peaceful silence. It was the silence of judgment. I looked around the table. 25 people. Family. People I had known for years. People whose wedding gifts I had bought. People whose baby showers I had attended. Not one person spoke up. Karen's sister, a woman I had always been kind to, looked down at her plate, suppressing a smirk. Mike's colleague cleared his throat and took a sip of wine, looking away. They were uncomfortable, yes, but they were siding with the power. They were siding with the champagne and the marble countertops. I was just the old woman ruining the party. I felt a physical pain in my chest, sharp and cold. It wasn't a heart attack. It was my heart breaking. "I see," I said. My voice was steady now. The trembling had stopped. A strange, cold calm washed over me. It was the calm of someone who has nothing left to lose. "I'll leave the dish," I said. "You can throw it out." I turned around. I didn't look at Karen. I didn't look at Mike. I walked out of the kitchen, through the foyer, and to the coat closet. My hands were steady as I buttoned my wool coat. I wrapped my scarf around my neck. I could hear the murmur of conversation starting up again in the dining room. They weren't coming to stop me. They weren't running after me to apologize. They were probably relieved. She's gone, they were thinking. Now we can really party. I opened the heavy front door. The winter air hit me like a slap in the face, freezing the tears that I refused to let fall. I stepped out onto the porch and pulled the door shut behind me with a soft click. I walked down the long, well-lit driveway. The snow crunched under my boots. I looked back at the house one last time. The windows were glowing with warm, golden light. I could see the silhouette of my son standing by the fireplace, laughing again. He had chosen. He had chosen his status, his wife's approval, and his comfort over his own mother. He had called me needy. He had called me a vibe killer. I reached my car and unlocked it. The interior was freezing. I sat in the driver's seat and just breathed. My breath came out in white puffs. My hands started to shake, then a delayed reaction to the adrenaline. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. A burden, killing the vibe. I wasn't sad anymore. The sadness had evaporated in the cold air, leaving something harder in its place. Resolve. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. The screen glowed bright in the dark car. I didn't call my best friend, Susan, to cry. I didn't call my sister to vent. That's what the old Danielle would have done. The old Danielle would have sought comfort. The new Danielle sought justice. I opened my contacts and scrolled down to the GS. Garrison. He was my estate attorney, a shark of a man I had hired years ago when I set up the trust just in case. I had always hoped I would never have to use him for this purpose. I had kept him on retainer, a safety net I prayed I'd never need. I opened a new text message. My fingers tapped against the glass screen, loud in the silence of the car. Initiate the revocation. Tonight. I stared at the words for a second. Sending this text was the point of no return. Once I hit send, the house of cards I had built for them would fall. They would lose the security I had given them. They would have to face the real world, the one where bills have to be paid and actions have consequences. I thought of the brisket sitting next to the beer cans. I thought of Mike checking his watch. I pressed send. I watched the little bubble turn blue. Then, the status changed to delivered. I put the phone down on the passenger seat. I started the engine, turned on the headlights, and pulled away from the curb. I didn't look back at the house. I didn't need to. It wasn't my home anymore. And very soon, it wouldn't be theirs either. The drive from Westfield back to my condo in Clark is only about 15 minutes, but that night, it felt like I was crossing an ocean. The silence in my car was heavy, broken only by the rhythmic thump-thump of the tires on the asphalt and the hum of the heater battling the January cold. My phone sat on the passenger seat, the screen dark now. I glanced at it every few seconds, half expecting Garrison to call immediately, even though it was late. But I knew him better than that. Garrison wasn't the type to chat. He was the type to execute. You might be wondering who Garrison is. He isn't a secret lover, and he isn't some tough guy from the neighborhood. In my world, he's something much more powerful. Garrison is my estate attorney. He's the man who holds the keys to everything Mike and Karen think they own. As I turned onto the parkway, passing the dark outlines of trees and snowbanks, the adrenaline from the confrontation began to fade, replaced by a cold, hard knot of truth in my stomach. For years, I had let my family believe a comfortable lie. I let them believe that I was just Grandma, the nice old lady with the limited income who needed to be managed and tolerated. I let Mike puff out his chest and act like the self-made king of his castle. But the castle isn't his. It's mine. 10 years ago, when Mike and Karen were first married and pregnant with their first child, they were drowning in student debt. They were living in a cramped two-bedroom apartment, fighting about money every single day. I couldn't stand to watch it. I had worked hard my whole life, 40 years as a head nurse, picking up every holiday shift, investing every penny of my husband's life insurance, and living well below my means. I had built a substantial nest egg. I wanted my grandchildren to grow up in a safe neighborhood with good schools. So I made a decision. I took a massive chunk of my life savings and I bought the house in Westfield. I paid cash, $750,000. But I didn't just hand them the deed. I wasn't a fool. I listened to Garrison. We put the house into a revocable living trust. I am the grantor. I am the trustee. Legally, that house belongs to me. The arrangement was simple, or so I thought. I told Mike, you and Karen can live here rent-free. Raise your family. Save your money for the kids' college. Just pay the property taxes and the utilities. I remember the day I handed them the keys. Mike had tears in his eyes. He hugged me so hard my ribs ached. "Mom, you saved us," he had said. "We'll never forget this." Driving past the exit for the mall, I let out a bitter laugh. We'll never forget this. They had forgotten it within a year. Somewhere along the line, rent-free turned into ownership. Because I never held it over their heads, because I never barged in with a key, they started to treat the house like it was entirely their achievement. They renovated the kitchen with the marble counters. They put in the pool. They started acting like the house was a reflection of Mike's success, not my generosity. And I let them. That was my sin. I stayed silent. I thought that by letting Mike play the big man, I was helping his confidence. I thought that by staying in the background, I was keeping the peace. I pulled into the parking lot of my condo complex. It's a nice place, but it's modest. A two-bedroom unit on the ground floor. It's nothing like the mansion I just left. I parked my car and turned off the engine, sitting in the dark for a moment. I thought about the grandchildren's expense card. That was another mistake. 3 years ago, I gave Karen a supplementary credit card attached to my main account. For the kids, I had said, for braces, school trips, winter coats, just put it on here so you don't have to worry. At first, the charges were reasonable. Orthodontist bills, textbooks. But then the creep started. A charge for a lunch that cost $200. A wellness center charge that I'm pretty sure was a spa day. A bill from a high-end boutique that definitely didn't sell children's clothes. I never said a word. I paid the bill every month without comment. I told myself, she's the mother of my grandchildren. If she needs a massage to handle the stress, let her have it. I can afford it. I was buying their love. That's what I was doing. I was paying a monthly subscription fee for the privilege of being part of their family. And tonight, I realized the subscription had expired. I looked at the dashboard clock. 9:45 p.m. Tonight, they called me a burden. Karen stood in the kitchen I paid for, eating food stored in a refrigerator I bought, and called me heavy. Mike sat at a table in a dining room that legally belongs to me and told me I was killing the vibe. They didn't see a mother. They saw an ATM that had started to talk back. I opened my car door and stepped out. The air here at my condo was just as cold as it was in Westfield, but it felt cleaner, somehow, less suffocating. I walked up the path to my front door, digging for my keys. I realized something profound as I turned the lock. All these years, I thought I was protecting them. I thought I was giving them a leg up. But I wasn't. I was crippling them. I had insulated them from reality so thoroughly that they had lost all sense of gratitude or perspective. I had created monsters, entitled arrogant monsters who thought it was acceptable to banish their benefactor to a card table in the draft. I walked into my quiet, cozy living room and turned on the lamp. I didn't take off my coat. I went straight to my desk in the corner and opened my laptop. I logged into my bank account. I pulled up the credit card statement for the grandchildren's card. There it was, a charge from yesterday. Liquor World, $450. They had used my card to buy the booze for the party I was kicked out of. I stared at the screen, my finger hovering over the mouse. The anger that had been burning hot was cooling into something solid and sharp like forged steel. I wasn't just an old woman with a brisket anymore. I was the landlord. I was the bank. And it was time to call in the loan. I picked up my phone again. No response from Garrison yet, but I knew he would be drafting the paperwork first thing in the morning. He had warned me about this years ago. Danielle, he had said, generosity without boundaries is just self-sabotage. I was done sabotaging myself. I typed one more text, this time to my financial advisor, a separate contact from Garrison. Freeze the supplementary card ending in 4098. Immediately, mark it as lost or stolen if you have to. Just shut it down. I hit send. I sat back in my chair and looked around my modest living room. It wasn't grand. It didn't have marble counters, but it was mine. And tomorrow, Mike and Karen were going to learn a very hard lesson about whose house they were actually living in. The truth was about to come out, and it was going to cost them a lot more than a brisket. I woke up on January 2nd with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. The holidays were officially over. The decorations were likely still up in Westfield, but the festive spirit had died the moment I walked out that door. The morning light coming through my bedroom window wasn't warm, it was gray and unyielding, just like my mood. I made a cup of black coffee and sat at my small kitchen table. My hands, which had shaken so violently in the car 2 nights ago, were perfectly steady now. I reached for my phone. I hadn't looked at it since I sent that text to the bank advisor. There were 3 missed calls from Mike, and 1 long text message sent at 11:30 a.m. yesterday. I took a sip of coffee before opening it. Part of me, the old motherly part that was dying a slow death, hoped it was an apology. I hoped it would say, "Mom, I'm so sorry. I was drunk. I was stressed. Please forgive us." If he had sent that, maybe, just maybe, I would have called Garrison and told him to wait. But Mike didn't send an apology. I opened the message. "Mom, I really don't know what got into you last night. You really embarrassed us in front of Karen's family and my boss. Walking out like that was childish. Karen is extremely upset about the scene you caused in the kitchen. I think it's best if you give us some space for a few weeks. When you're ready to apologize to Karen for ruining the dinner, let us know. Until then, please don't just drop by." I stared at the screen. I read it twice. Apologize to Karen. He wanted me to apologize to the woman who called me a burden while drinking wine bought with my money. He wanted me to apologize for leaving a house I paid for after being told to sit in a drafty corner. That text message was a gift. It was the final confirmation that I was doing the right thing. It erased the last shred of guilt I had about what I was about to do. They didn't just disrespect me. They felt entitled to disrespect me. They thought I was so desperate for their love that I would crawl back and beg for forgiveness just to see my grandchildren. I didn't reply. I put the phone in my purse, grabbed my car keys, and drove straight to Garrison's office. Garrison's firm was in a brick building downtown, the kind with heavy wooden doors and the smell of old paper and furniture polish. Garrison was waiting for me. He was a man of few words, sharp suits, and even sharper instincts. He had the file already open on his mahogany desk. "Good morning, Danielle," he said, not smiling. He knew why I was here. I got your text. I've prepared the drafts. I sat down in the leather chair opposite him. Let's do it. He pushed a stack of papers toward me. We have 3 items of business. Let's go through them one by one to make sure you understand the implications. He slid the first document across the desk. It was thick, printed on heavy bond paper. First, the house in Westfield. Garrison said, as we established, the property is held in the Danielle Schulman Revocable Living Trust. You are the sole trustee. Mike and Karen have been occupying the property as tenants at will. This means they have no lease and no ownership rights. He pointed to the signature line. This is a notice to quit. In the state of New Jersey, we have to give them proper notice. This document terminates their tenancy. It gives them 2 options: vacate the premises within 30 days or begin paying fair market rent. What is the fair market rent for a 5-bedroom colonial in Westfield? I asked. Garrison checked his notes. Conservatively, $6,500 a month, plus utilities, landscaping, and pool maintenance, which I understand you've been covering indirectly. $6,500. That was the amount I had been gifting them every month, essentially, and they treated me like a beggar asking for a scrap of meat. If they don't pay, I asked, then eviction proceedings begin on day 31. Garrison said flatly, and I will handle it. You won't have to say a word to them. I picked up the pen. I didn't hesitate. I signed my name at the bottom. Danielle Schulman, trustee. Garrison took the paper back and slid the second document forward. Second, the financials, he said. You already froze the credit card. This document formally removes Karen and Mike as authorized users on all your accounts. It also revokes any power of attorney they might have had in case of your incapacitation. Done, I said, signing the paper. That was the easy part. The credit card was just the appetizer. And finally, Garrison said, his voice dropping a decibel, the last will and testament. He opened a leather binder. Currently, your estate is set to be divided equally between your son Mike and your grandchildren, with Mike acting as the executor. This new draft changes that. I looked at the document. It was a complete rewrite. Under this new amendment, Garrison explained, Mike is disinherited completely. He receives nothing. Not the condo, not the investments, and certainly not the Westfield house. The house will be sold upon your passing, and the proceeds, along with the rest of your assets, will go into a strict trust for your grandchildren. He paused, looking me right in the eye. And here is the kicker, Danielle. The trust for the grandchildren will be managed by an independent fiduciary. Mike and Karen cannot access a single cent of it. They can't use it for rent or groceries or management fees. It is strictly for tuition and medical expenses, paid directly to the providers. It was perfect. It ensured that my hard work would still help the children, but Mike and Karen wouldn't be able to siphon off a dime for their country club lifestyle. They will be furious, Garrison warned, when they find out, and they eventually will. They will say you are being vindictive. I thought about the text message again. Give us some space. They wanted space, I said, picking up the pen for the final time. I'm giving them the ultimate space. I'm removing myself from their financial lives entirely. I signed the will. The scratch of the pen against the paper sounded loud in the quiet office. It sounded like a heavy door slamming shut. Garrison gathered the papers and tapped them on the desk to straighten the stack. He looked at me, his expression softening just a fraction. He had known me for 20 years. He knew how much I loved that boy. Danielle, he said softly, are you sure? Once I file the notice to quit, the sheriff serves it. It becomes public record. There is no unringing this bell. I stood up and buttoned my coat. I thought of the cold garage. I thought of the drafty card table. I thought of the smirk on Karen's face, and the way Mike checked his watch while I begged for a leftover. "Garrison," I said, my voice steady and cold. They stood up in a room full of people and called me a burden. They said I was heavy. I looked at the stack of signed papers, the eviction, the disinheritance, the end of the free ride. "I'm just doing what they asked." I said, "I'm relieving myself of the weight." I walked out of his office and into the cold January sunlight. I felt lighter than I had in years. The checkmate was in motion. Now, all I had to do was wait for the phone to ring. 3 days passed. 3 days of absolute radio silence. I didn't call them. They didn't call me. I imagine they were enjoying the space they had so rudely demanded. They probably thought I was sitting in my condo crying over old photo albums, working up the courage to call Karen and apologize for ruining her dinner party. They probably thought I was learning my lesson, but the lesson was heading for them, and it was arriving on a Wednesday afternoon. I wasn't there to see it happen, but I know exactly how it played out. I know Karen's routine. I paid for that routine for years. Wednesday is her shopping day, but not at the regular supermarket where normal people shop. Karen shops at a high-end organic market in downtown Westfield, the kind of place where they play classical music and the strawberries cost $10 a box. I can picture it perfectly. It was likely around 2 p.m. Karen would have filled her cart with the necessities for the week. Imported cheeses, organic wines, fresh flowers for the foyer, maybe some expensive cuts of meat for a dinner party I wouldn't be invited to. She probably had a latte in her hand, feeling secure, feeling wealthy, feeling like the queen of the castle. She would have walked up to the register, chatting with the cashier, not a care in the world. As the total rang up, probably $300 or $400, she would have reached into her designer purse and pulled out the platinum card. My card, the grandchildren's card. She swiped it. Now, usually this is the part where the machine chirps and the receipt prints. But not today. Today, the machine gave a low, angry buzz. Declined. I imagine Karen frowned. She probably let out a little sigh of annoyance, thinking the chip was dirty or the machine was faulty. She would have wiped the card on her sweater, rolled her eyes at the cashier, and inserted it again. Processing. Declined. The cashier, likely a young girl who knows Karen by name, would have given her that polite, pitying look. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Schulman. It says do not honor. Do you have another form of payment?" This is the moment where the embarrassment starts to itch. There were probably people in line behind her, neighbors, other mothers from the school. They were watching. The woman who always acted so superior, the woman who catered her parties and wore the latest fashions, was being declined for groceries. "That's ridiculous," Karen would have snapped, her voice getting a little too loud. "My mother-in-law pays that bill. She must have forgotten. She's getting older. You know how it is." She tried to blame me. Even in that moment, she couldn't fathom that the well had run dry. She thought I was just incompetent. She would have had to scramble. Did she use her own debit card? Did she have enough in her own account to cover $400 of luxury groceries? Or did she have to do the walk of shame, leaving the cart there, full of bagging items, and walking out of the store while the people in line whispered? Knowing Karen, she probably threw a fit, blamed the bank, and stormed out to her car to call Mike. This is where the second domino fell. Mike would have been at work, or maybe working from home in the study I furnished. His phone rang. It was Karen, panicked and angry. "Mike, your mother forgot to pay the credit card bill. It just got declined at the market. It was humiliating. You need to call her and fix this right now." Mike, ever the arrogant problem solver, wouldn't have called me first. He would have tried to fix it himself. He would have opened the banking app on his phone. He had the login saved. He checked that account every week, not to see if I needed help, but to make sure the limit was high enough for their spending. He opened the app. He used his thumbprint to log in. But instead of seeing the available balance, he saw a red box. A notification. Access denied. User privileges revoked. Contact account holder. He must have stared at that screen for a long time. User privileges revoked. That's not a glitch. That's not a missed payment. That is a deliberate action. I imagine the cold feeling that started to creep down his neck. The realization that something was wrong. Really wrong. He tried to refresh the page. Nothing. The account was gone from his view. The grandchildren's card was dead. He probably told Karen, "Hang on, I think the bank's system is down. Let me call Mom." But before he could dial my number, the doorbell rang at the Westfield house. It was 3:30 p.m. The courier from Garrison's firm is very punctual. I wasn't there, but Garrison told me the delivery confirmation was signed by Michael Schulman. Mike opened the door, probably expecting an Amazon package. Instead, he found a man in a uniform holding a thick manila envelope with the legal firm's logo in the corner. "Sign here, please." Mike signed. He took the envelope. He closed the door. He stood in the foyer with the high ceilings and the chandelier, and tore open the seal. It wasn't a holiday card. It wasn't an apology letter. It was the notice to quit. I can see him reading it, his eyes scanning the legal jargon until they hit the plain English in the middle. Termination of tenancy at will. Notice to vacate premises within 30 days. Option to remain. Lease agreement at fair market value. Monthly rent, $6,500. The silence in that house must have been heavy. He wasn't the owner anymore. He wasn't the king of the castle. He was a squatter with a 30-day clock ticking over his head. And then he saw the second document, the copy of the credit card cancellation, and the notification that he had been removed as a beneficiary on my life insurance. The panic didn't set in slowly. It hit him all at once. The mortgage he didn't have to pay? Gone. The utilities he ignored? Now his problem. The credit card that bought their groceries and gas? Cut up. The lifestyle they had built, the trips, the clothes, the parties, it was all supported by a scaffolding of my money. And I had just kicked the scaffolding out from under them. My phone started ringing at 4:15 p.m. I was sitting in my living room, reading a book, a cup of tea steaming on the table next to me. The screen lit up. Mike. I looked at it. I didn't reach for it. It rang and rang. Then it went to voicemail. 2 minutes later. Karen. I let that one ring too. Then the text started coming. Mom, what is this? Mom, call me. The card isn't working. Mom, there's a guy here with papers. This has to be a mistake. Danielle, pick up the phone. We have no food in the house. The arrogance was gone. The tone of give us space had vanished. There was no more, you're embarrassing us. Now it was fear. Pure, unadulterated fear. They were realizing that the burden they had mocked was actually the pillar holding up their entire world. And now that the burden was gone, the roof was caving in. I took a sip of my tea. It was Earl Grey, hot and soothing. I watched the phone light up again. Mike calling. I reached over and flipped the phone face down on the table. I wasn't being cruel. I was teaching them. For 30 years, I had been the safety net. I had caught them every time they fell. I had cushioned every blow. But you can't learn to stand if someone is always carrying you. They wanted space. They wanted to be independent adults who didn't need a needy old woman cramping their style. So I gave them exactly what they asked for. I let the phone ring into the silence of my quiet, peaceful condo, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the urge to fix it. I just felt free. It didn't take long for them to show up. I knew they would. When you back a cornered animal into a wall, it doesn't just sit there. It lashes out. And Mike and Karen were definitely cornered. It was about 7 o'clock that same evening. I had just finished my tea and was rinsing the cup in the sink when the pounding started. It wasn't a polite knock. It was a heavy, frantic hammering that made the pictures on my hallway wall rattle. Thud, thud, thud. Mom, Mom, open up. We know you're in there. It was Mike. His voice was muffled by the heavy steel core door of my condo, but I could hear the panic in it. It was the voice of a man who had lost control. My heart gave a little jump. Old habits die hard, but I didn't run to the door. I didn't rush to soothe him. Instead, I walked over to the small monitor on my wall that connected to the doorbell camera. The image was grainy in the porch light, but I could see them clearly. They looked like wrecks. Mike's tie was loosened, his hair messy, his face red with exertion. Karen was standing behind him, wrapped in her expensive beige coat, her arms crossed tight against her chest, pacing back and forth like a caged cat. They didn't look like the masters of the universe anymore. They looked like desperate children. The banging started again. Danielle, open this door right now. Karen screamed. I took a deep breath. This was it, the moment of truth. I pressed the button on the intercom. I am not opening the door, Mike. My voice came out calm, amplified slightly by the speaker outside. I saw Mike jump. He leaned in close to the camera, his face distorting in the fisheye lens. Mom, stop playing games, he shouted. Open the door. We need to talk about this letter. You can't just evict us. That's our house. It's not your house, Mike, I said, leaning against the wall. I felt incredibly tired, but also incredibly strong. It has never been your house. It is a property belonging to the Schulman Trust, and you have violated the terms of your tenancy. Tenancy? Mike spat the word like it was poison. I'm your son. You can't treat me like a tenant. We have lived there for 10 years. Yes, I replied. 10 years rent-free. 10 years of me paying the property taxes. 10 years of me fixing the roof and paying for the boiler when it broke. And how did you repay me? You put me at the kids' table. Karen pushed Mike aside and shoved her face into the camera's view. She had clearly been crying, or at least she had done a good job of messing up her mascara to look like she had. Danielle, please, she wailed. Her voice went up an octave into that shrill, pleading tone she used when she wanted something. We were just stressed. You know how holidays are. I didn't mean what I said in the kitchen. I was just overwhelmed. We love you. You're the kid's grandmother. I watched her on the small screen. I watched the fake tears track down her cheeks. I remembered the look in her eyes 3 nights ago. The pure venom when she called me heavy. You didn't seem to love me when you told me I was a burden, I said through the intercom. You didn't seem to love me when you told me I was killing the vibe. I was drunk. Karen sobbed. I didn't mean it. No, Karen, I said softly. You meant it. Alcohol tells the truth. You said I was always taking and never giving. You said I was a burden on your mood and your life. I paused. Outside, the wind was picking up, whipping Karen's hair around her face. So I listened to you. I continued. I went home, and I thought about what you said. And I realized you were right. I have been a burden. I've been burdening you with my financial support. I've been burdening you with a free house. I've been burdening you with free groceries and a platinum credit card. Mike slammed his hand against the door again. Mom, stop it. You're ruining us. The bank froze everything. I can't even buy gas. That sounds like a problem for a self-made man, I said. You stood up at that table and bragged about your success. You toasted your bonus. You toasted your hard work. Surely, a successful man like you doesn't need his mommy to buy his gas. You're being vindictive. Mike screamed. You're doing this just to hurt us. I am doing this to liberate you. I corrected him. You said I took and never gave. So, I am removing myself. I am removing the burden. You are now free, Mike. You are free to support yourself. You are free to pay your own mortgage. You are free to buy your own food. You are free to live your life without my heavy presence dragging you down. There was a silence on the other side of the door. The reality of my words was sinking in. They weren't fighting a mother who wanted an apology. They were fighting a landlord who wanted them out. Mom, Mike's voice cracked. It dropped from a scream to a whimper. Mom, please. We can't afford the rent. $6,000? We don't have that kind of cash flow. We're leveraged to the hilt. I know, I said. I know you are, because you spent your money on cars and vacations while I paid for your necessities. But that is not my problem anymore. We have nowhere to go, Karen whispered. You have 30 days, I reminded her. That is more than enough time to find an apartment that fits your actual budget. I suggest you start looking. And I suggest you stop using the country club membership, because I canceled that too. I heard Karen gasp. Mom, open the door. Mike started pounding again, harder this time. He was kicking the bottom of the door. Open the door. We're not leaving until you sign the papers to reverse this. I looked at the monitor. I saw the violence in his body language. This wasn't my little boy anymore. This was a desperate stranger. Mike, I said, my voice dropping to a steely hardness I didn't know I possessed. If you hit my door one more time, I am calling the police. He froze. His fist hovered in the air. I mean it, I said. I have the phone in my hand. If you do not get off my porch in the next 30 seconds, I will call 911 and report you for trespassing and harassment. And think about how that will look to your boss. Think about how a police report for harassing an elderly woman will look on your record. Mike stared at the camera. He looked shocked. He had never heard me threaten him before. He had never heard me draw a line in the sand. He looked at Karen. Karen looked terrified. She grabbed his arm. Mike, let's go, she hissed. She's crazy. She'll do it. I'm not crazy, I said through the speaker. I'm just done. Mike looked at the door one last time. His face crumbled. For a split second, I saw the regret. I saw the realization of what he had thrown away. But it was too late. You can't unbreak a plate. Fine, he spat. Fine. Have it your way. Die alone in this condo. I'd rather be alone in a condo I own, I replied, than surrounded by people who only love me for my checkbook. He turned around. He didn't look back. He marched down the walkway to his leased luxury car. Karen scurried after him, clutching her coat, casting one fearful glance back at the unblinking eye of the camera. I watched them get into the car. I watched the taillights flare red as he slammed it into reverse. I watched them drive away into the darkness. I turned off the monitor. The silence in the hallway was absolute. My hands were trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the sheer magnitude of what I had just done. I had cut the cord. I had severed the limb to save the body. I walked back to the kitchen and picked up my tea. It was cold now. I poured it down the sink. I felt a tear slide down my cheek, but I wiped it away quickly. It hurt. Of course it hurt. He was my son. But as I looked around my quiet, safe home, I knew I had made the only choice left. I had finally demanded the one thing they refused to give me for free: respect. And if I had to charge them $6,500 a month to get it, then that was the price they would have to pay. It has been 6 months since I stood on my porch and watched my son's taillights disappear into the darkness. The winter ice has melted, and the trees outside my condo window are full and green. It is June now, and the world looks very different than it did on that cold New Year's Eve. You are probably wondering what happened to Mike and Karen. They didn't pay the rent. I knew they wouldn't. They didn't have the $6,500, and they certainly didn't have the humility to ask for a payment plan. They stayed in the Westfield house for exactly 29 days. On the 30th day, a moving truck pulled into the driveway. They didn't move to another mansion. They couldn't pass the credit check without my co-signature. They downsized to a 2-bedroom apartment in a neighboring town. It's a nice enough place, but it doesn't have a pool, and it certainly doesn't have marble countertops. I heard through the grapevine that Karen had to go back to work. She's working as a receptionist at a dental office now. I imagine it's hard for her, having to answer phones and be polite to strangers all day, but I honestly believe it's good for her character. And Mike, he's driving a 3-year-old sedan now. The luxury lease was returned. I haven't spoken to them since that night on the porch. I haven't seen my grandchildren, which is the only part of this that causes me pain. But I know that eventually when they are older, they will reach out. And when they do, I will be here with a trust fund that their parents can't touch, ready to help them build their own lives the right way. But this chapter isn't really about them. It's about me. Last night, I went out to dinner. It wasn't a family obligation. It wasn't a holiday where I was forced to sit at the kids' table. It was a Tuesday night, and I went out with my friends, Susan and Linda. We went to a lovely Italian restaurant, not unlike the one that catered Mike's party. When the hostess led us to our table, she didn't walk us to the back, near the drafty window. She sat us right in the center of the room, under the warm glow of the lights. And do you know where I sat? I sat at the head of the table. We ordered a bottle of wine, a good one. When the waiter poured it, he handed the cork to me. I tasted it, nodded, and poured for my friends. We laughed for 3 hours straight. We talked about books, we talked about gardening, and we talked about travel. So, Danielle, Susan asked me as we were finishing our tiramisu, what are you going to do with all that extra cash flow now that you aren't subsidizing the lifestyle of the rich and famous? I reached into my purse and pulled out a brochure I had picked up that morning. I laid it on the crisp white tablecloth. Greece, I said, smiling. 14 days. A balcony suite. I've always wanted to see the Parthenon. Susan's eyes went wide. That looks expensive, Danielle. It is, I replied, taking a sip of my wine. But it turns out when you aren't paying a $6,000 mortgage for people who don't respect you, you have a lot of disposable income. I felt a lightness in my chest that I haven't felt in 30 years. For so long, I thought my value as a mother was tied to how much I could give. I thought that if I just wrote enough checks, if I just cooked enough briskets, if I just made myself small enough to fit into their lives, they would love me. But I learned the hard way that you cannot buy respect. You have to command it. I looked around the restaurant at the other families. I saw a mother laughing with her adult daughter. I saw a grandmother holding a baby. I know that family is beautiful when it works, but I also know that family is not a free pass for abuse. I want to speak directly to you now. Yes, you listening to this story. We teach people how to treat us. It took me 68 years to learn that lesson. I spent decades teaching my son that he could use me, ignore me, and discard me, and I would still be there with my checkbook open. I taught him that my feelings didn't matter. When I closed that door and threatened to call the police, I wasn't being cruel. I was finally teaching him a new lesson. I was teaching him that I am a person. I was teaching him that I have dignity. And most importantly, I was teaching myself that I am enough. It is a terrible thing to realize that the people you love see you as a burden, but it is a wonderful thing to realize that you have the strength to put that burden down. Mike was right about one thing. He said I was heavy. He didn't mean it as a compliment, but I'll take it as one. I am heavy with experience. I am heavy with self-worth. And I am too heavy to be pushed around anymore. I am not dying alone in my condo. I am living in it. I am sleeping soundly at night. I am booking cruises. I am drinking good wine with friends who look me in the eye when I speak. Don't set yourself on fire to keep ungrateful people warm. They will just watch you burn and complain that the smoke is annoying them. Save your warmth for the people who appreciate it. Save your warmth for yourself. Did you like the story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you like the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story.